Welcome to Why I Quit, a show that covers real people quitting their 9-to-5 jobs in search of something different. Listen to inspiring conversations where we dive deep into the stories of why people quit their jobs, what were the hardest parts, where are they now, and any advice for people following the same path. We are so excited to introduce Ryan Beach as this week's guest on Why I Quit. Listen as Ryan discusses his journey of hitting his career goals very early on. Learn how he decided to take a leave of absence and travel around South America for 3 months. Get inspired hearing how this gave him the time and space to figure out what he wanted and led to a promotion and a new role at his company. Hey, Ryan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Dave, how are you?
Good. Well, I'm excited to hear your story. Do you mind starting off telling me a little bit about your educational background and how that transitioned into your first job?
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in Delaware. I've lived most of my life in Delaware, and as one often does, they look at schools in state. And so I went to University of Delaware. I graduated in 2012 with a degree in political science. When I was going into college, I had this lofty idea of wanting to be president of the United States. And then I quickly realized it seemed a little bit more stressful and maybe less financially advantageous than one might think. And so I quickly pivoted. Even though I kept that degree, I pivoted to some different ideas for what I wanted to do with my career and with my post-college profession. And so after college, I got a job at JP Morgan. I was working in the private bank supporting their ultra high net and high net clients. I was based out of Newark, so I moved home, lived with my parents, and spent a couple of years just building a little bit of a base financially and getting experience with JP Morgan. But at a certain point, I knew it really wasn't what I was looking for. I'd always enjoyed finance and investing and trading, but when it came to what I felt like I was good at, which was really more the communication and conversation and the ability to work with people on the other side of the fence, whether that's customers or partners, and just find a common ground. And my dad's been a salesman for his whole career. And growing up, I always saw him on the road, meeting with clients, traveling, going to business meetings, being on conference calls. I think I've logged more time with him, listening to him, talking to his clients than I have, maybe my own, just being in the car, going to baseball practice. So I always kind of like that energy, that life, kind of defining your own path. And so at a certain point where I realized, the banking life wasn't for me, I started to look at sales jobs. And, for me, I kind of set 2 key criteria, one of which was ideally get into a large multinational company. And then if they happen to have a sales training program that could, develop me and put me on the map per se, that was what I was looking for. And I got really lucky. SAP, enterprise software company, had just launched a global sales training program led by, at the time, CEO Bill McDermott. And they were looking for, early talent. So people in their early to mid 20s to bring on and ultimately place into field sales roles. And the role itself was a 9-month sales development program with individuals from 99 of us from, I think it was like 30 different countries. And so within the US, there were about 25 of us. And I was based in New York City. So I packed up my stuff from home and I moved into New York City at the beginning of 2014 and started this training program. And, for me, it was exactly what I was looking for. It was, sort of the hands-on training that you got from a mentor in New York. And then 3 of those 9 months we spent out in Dublin, Pleasanton, California, East Bay, in the classroom. And we were, really given sort of world-class training on, how do you not only present and deliver and execute a presentation, but how do you work across extended teams? How do you collaborate? How do you negotiate? How do you discover and have discovery meetings with customers to ultimately enable the products that you were selling to work for a client's or prospect's needs? And so did that for 9 months. And basically after that, I spent 3 more years with SAP, working in a couple different sales functions, selling into financial services clients. But at a certain point, an old boss of mine had joined a company, Workday. I had spent enough time losing to Workday in the enterprise HR and finance space that you can't beat them, join them, right? And so 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, I joined Workday. And at that point, I moved to the West Coast. So I moved from New York and then actually had a stint in Chicago with SAP. And then at which point I moved out to California and spent 5 years with Workday. And I can keep going into that, but I'm sure you may have some questions.
That's a perfect start. And, I'm curious in terms of kind of like that hands-on educational piece. I know something that, people grapple with a lot is like, should they go to grad school, and thinking about like additional training versus like educational training. And I'd love your perspective in terms of like, how you think about, people that are considering paying to go back to school or being trained by a company or looking for a job that trains you, based on your experience, what's kind of your advice to people that are looking down that path?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because for me, I never had a desire to go to grad school. I barely liked school to begin with. As a sales guy, I'd rather be sort of making my own way and trying different things to drive selling. And so for me, school in and of itself and following a curriculum wasn't preferred. Therefore, I did not look at an MBA or business school as something that was desirable. That said, having the structure of a sales training program, I wouldn't be where I am today without it. And so I think depending upon what your goals are, right, and the profession that you're in and, what you're looking to pursue, I do think there are absolutely reasons to get an MBA. I think there are absolutely reasons to get, whether it's further education through certifications or programs that like Harvard's Business School or other organizations put on. But I think it really has to align with what your objectives are. And so for me, the sales training program was the foundation. And interestingly enough, at 32 now and 10 years in the workforce, I'm more open-minded to an MBA. I don't know if at this point it's something that I would necessarily gravitate towards, but if somebody or a future employer said, hey, we'd really prefer you to have your business degree for this reason, I think I would consider it more.
I'd love to hear about your mindset at this, current time period. Are you thinking that you're going to be a sales lifer in terms of kind of like a corporate career, or, do you have like side aspirations, or, where's your mindset at as you are kind of like transitioning from SAP to Workday?
And so at this point, I've been with Workday for 5 years, and what I chose to do was to take a personal leave of absence. And so, and one of the things that for any of the listeners, as they're thinking about maybe making a leap or doing something different, is understanding what their options are. Because certainly you can resign and quit and sort of figure out what's next. Workday, given that I had been there 5 years and had, I think delivered strong results for them, gave me the option to take this leave of absence, which is unpaid. So I'm not being paid at the moment, but have a little bit of a sort of that safety net. Up to 12 months. And so I'm 2 months into this leave of absence and not working. And to answer your question, I honestly don't know. And what I wanted to do with this time away was to see how it felt to be detached, to see how it felt to not be working, to see if, while I am off and traveling and meeting new people and experiencing different things, if I came across passions, hobbies, interests that maybe I didn't know or wouldn't have paid enough attention to while working, and to see what develops. And it's very possible that after 6-9 months, I said, you know what, that was a great run, love traveling. I think what I was doing was pretty damn good, and I'm going to go back to that. But at this point, I'm really just sort of letting the moment come to me and see what happens.
How long was it from when you first had the idea of the concept of taking a leave of absence till you actually acted on it?
So it's a great question. Beginning of 2022, so almost a year ago, our sales year effectively wrapped up. And so for me, I had accomplished what I wanted to from a sales standpoint, and honestly from a career standpoint up until now, which was, to be top sales rep at my company. And I was very fortunate to have achieved that. It's kind of something that when I was 22 and started SAP, that's what you put on the vision board. It's like be number one, sell, and hopefully make a lot of money. And I was fortunate to have at 32 done that. And frankly, I had a little bit of a deflating moment where I was like, now what? It's like I've accomplished this goal that I had in my mind for so long. I kind of felt a little like depressed. I was like, do I keep doing this? Is this what it was supposed to be? Is this what it's supposed to feel like? And so that was, I was still riding the high of the year. I was still riding the high of some of the awards and celebrations. And, you go to on your club trip and everybody, cheers and all that stuff. So May rolls around and that's starting to kind of come down. And I think about the sales year ahead. And it was at that point, so May of 2022, I was like, what other options do I have? And I was fortunate to have very supportive sales leadership to kind of work through those options with me. But I remember going over to Europe in mid-June, and it was part of it was a work meeting. Part of it, I extended some time just to do some vacation and traveling. And I just remember feeling very invigorated by being outside of the US and, being a little uncomfortable, being, in an environment where I didn't necessarily speak the language. And it was the first time in a while I felt sort of fresh and I felt energetic. And I think it was right around then I was like, okay, what would it look like if I took some time away to travel? What would it look like if, I decided that I wanted to pause and not make an income and do that? And so at that point, I hadn't really formulated a strategy. It was just like, this is something in my mind to do. And then over the coming months, I was like, okay, I got to move out of my house in LA. I got to, start cutting down all the stupid subscriptions that I'm paying monthly for. And I started to kind of slowly act upon what it would be like if I didn't have a job. And then around late August, I said, I think this is what I need to do. It took a couple months, but it happened more quickly than I expected.
What was the hardest part of the process in terms of actually, committing to take the leave of absence? Were you super nervous at the time? Were you so confident in the decision that you weren't that worried about it? Was it talking to your bosses? What was that process like?
So I think it was probably somewhere in the middle where I felt pretty good. And I believe I have a pretty strong conviction with a lot of the things that I do, and I, very few regrets. And so I kind of trusted my gut a little bit that it was the right thing. It was more of the tactical, like I said, moving out of my house that I'd been living in for 5 years, putting things in storage, I had so much crap that I had accumulated over the years. It was more the stress of executing against the actual move and sort of leaving than it was, not having the job per se. And so the stress came from sort of the detachment period where I had to get rid of all the things that I'd come used to, whether it was the paycheck, whether it was, the same place I'd live in, my groups of friends, and really start to plan out what I was going to do next.
What was the hardest thing for you to give up during the process? Was it, the aspect of, moving away from, friends and security? Was it, kind of financial uncertainty, or was it, also just waking up and not knowing what you're going to do the next day? Kind of, where was your head at with that?
I think it was the last one where, for 10 years, I have been disciplined by the structures of a job, right? And, before that, school. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to have a disciplined schedule or things that I needed to do when I woke up. And I was a little scared of what is it going to look like now that I don't have, something to do every day? And will I have the self-discipline to be productive, to grow, to develop? What am I going to work on? What are the things and the hobbies and the skills that I want to get better at? And at first I was nervous, and then I had to talk myself down a little bit and be like, if at the end of the day for 6 months, you just have fun, that's good. Now, it's not what I wanted to do, but I think I needed to remind myself that just the time away to decompress and relax was productive. But to answer your question, the thing that I was most nervous about was just kind of wasting the time.
Something I think you hear people talk about, when they quit, or even you hear a lot when people retire, is that a lot of times they just move the time or energy from what they did in a 9-to-5 structured work into just going all into the next thing. Talk to me a little bit about how you thought about how you wanted to use that time. I know it's only been 2 months, but how do you think about structuring that and kind of creating the goals and boundaries around that?
Yeah, I look at it as the framework that I've used is, establishing 3 broader goals: one personal, one professional, one, call it mental or physical. So, the one hand is I have been working on my Spanish, right? So spending a lot of time in Latin America, one of my goals was to become more proficient. And, I didn't say I wanted to be fluent per se, but I just wanted to be more confident and comfortable to navigate countries that, English may have a little bit of being spoken, but it generally isn't. So that was one of the goals that I had set. And I would say I'm not as far along, but I am feeling better than I did. So that was one. Number two was thinking about, like, I have a couple friends who are either starting businesses or are founders that don't really have a skill set in sales. And so just doing sort of pro bono assistance where, hey, like, what are your goals? What are you thinking about? And what don't you think you have that from a business development or a sales standpoint you'd like to have? And just having some conversations with them around, is my skill set and expertise as good as I think it is? And then if so, how can we translate that into, a 5-person company that's looking to scale up a little bit? Can I help them with that? And really not having any expectations at this point, right? Because for me, I was clear to myself that I wanted to spend at least 3, 4, 5 months just not seeking any sort of income, any sort of like work that would stress me out, but help if possible. So those were like the first two. And then the third is really just, as I'm traveling, putting myself out there socially and meeting new people. And it's very easy to stay in an Airbnb or a hotel room and just go to dinner and go home. But, meeting new people, meeting interesting people. So those were sort of the 3 different broader goals that I had set for myself.
I'm curious in terms of, meeting new people and experiencing new things. I think that's like the older that we get, the harder it is to meet new people, make new friends. Kind of putting yourself out there seems like a lot more difficult. Talk to me a little bit about that as you've like done that in the beginning. Is it more difficult than you thought, or is it easier, or what's that been like?
So the first 2 months I've spent down mostly in Argentina, and I started there because it was a bit of a soft landing because I had friends that lived there. And so I had visited there a few times before. I loved Buenos Aires. I loved the country. And I, was fortunate to have buddies that lived there. And so to start and spending time there, I didn't really need to proactively socialize or get out of my comfort zone because I had a group of friends already that were down there just sort of to blend in with. Right now, the one challenge was that when they were all speaking Spanish and I was the guy, who only understood English, I had to figure out what to do with my hands and twiddle my thumbs, or how do you engage without being rude or interrupting a conversation. And so, that was a little, maybe a bit of a discomfort, but going down. So tonight I'm flying to Peru, and this is the solo part of the trip where I'm going to spend some time in Peru and Bolivia and Colombia. And so to answer your question, I don't know yet because I haven't necessarily had to, but over the coming months, it's really going to be more of that. All right, how do you engage? How do you meet new people? But not just an expat sitting at the bar next to you, but someone from the region, and can I, engage in whether it's limited in English, limited in Spanish, like how can you engage with the people that actually live there and not just stick to the comforts of expat travelers?
I know something, especially with work, it's hard to turn off, your phone's in your pocket at all times. You have your work email, your Slack, your, all of your, communication kind of tied to it. How do you think about, the digital and connected side when you're off? Are you trying to, kind of step away from that a little bit, or is it kind of like the same as what you're typically doing, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I hate to admit it's still probably the same. Now, the benefits of having a data plan or having a U.S. data plan in Latin America is to avoid using data and getting hit with $1,000 for the charges. I do try to be less data usage, Wi-Fi, only sort of strategy. I did have a period where my SIM card stopped working, so I couldn't use, my phone or text anybody for like 2 weeks. And so I had a little bit of forced experience there. But to your point, I am trying to get better. I'm not there yet, but at this point I've been pretty connected. But I do think traveling, Machu Picchu, for example, where I'm going to, spend some time in a few weeks, no service, right? And so I think forcing that disconnectivity, where ideally I would have to force it, but hopefully that will then remind me that you don't need to be connected all the time, and you can sort of receive the benefits of just being off the grid.
I'm curious in terms of, obviously there's a lot of things that led to like, you taking this leave. Earlier you mentioned, kind of being in Europe opened your eyes to kind of new experiences and things like that. But you also talked about how, you worked to become like the top of your field. What percentage of this do you think is like the stresses or the intensity of getting to that point versus actually the other side of it, which is just like looking for new experiences?
I think it's looking for new experiences piece. Like, sure, the job's stressful. Sales can be stressful. You're navigating and working across a lot of different streams, whether it's your customers directly, internal stakeholders, sales leaders asking for forecasts and deal updates. That's stressful, but I always enjoyed that, right? Like I kind of enjoyed, being a little bit under the gun. And so I think it's more of the latter of what you asked, which is seeking new experiences, getting uncomfortable, right? Being challenged, and being challenged doesn't necessarily have to be professional, but it's in an environment where you got to use your head to navigate, right? And so you don't always know what those are going to look like, but this for me was really learning something new, maybe as a skill, learning more about myself, and really kind of getting a little dirty and gritty and figuring out, the inner operations of life, I guess is what I would describe it. So, because I don't mind going back and working hard and applying myself in ways that I think are useful, but I just felt like I wanted to apply myself in a new way.
That kind of transitions into something we talk about with most guests on the show is, really the concept of work-life balance, or a lot of people talk about like work-life integration. And I think with, remote and hybrid, I think a lot of these things are like blending together. I'm curious, kind of how you thought about work-life balance, when you were at your previous company, and then has that changed at all, in this short time that you've, obviously been going through, traveling as well?
As someone, I think it helps, right? I'm a single guy with no kids, right? And so working, up for the last 10 years for me was I was good with it, right? Like I didn't, and to be clear, I think I had a pretty good work-life balance. If I wanted to go to the gym, I would do that. If I wanted to go on a trip and maybe work remotely or just take the time off, I would do that. And I had the support, I think, of good bosses who were encouraged and enabled, taking that time off to reset. But I also didn't mind, being on my phone at the gym or like texting, checking emails. I kind of liked the coexistence aspect of it, because for me, it made sense. But, now if I had a wife and kids and they were, wouldn't be happy that I was that's a different conversation, but I can't speak to that because I didn't live it. Whereas now it's just the life part of it that I'm managing. And so I would almost say that it's remembering and reminding myself to stay in touch with, people I care about. That's to me, the balance piece is, I can go off on this venture and go find myself and have a great time. But, there's people on the other side that are supporting you, whether it's parents, siblings, friends. And so I think that's the reminder, is staying in touch and checking in and seeing how other people are doing as well.
I'm curious, as you've, kind of went through the process of actually making, the leap to, take some time off, a lot of people who are listening are looking to either quit, make a change, or, have recently done so. What's, a piece of advice you would give someone who's like thinking about going down a similar path?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I know oftentimes, you hear the stories or people who say, well, so-and-so said it wasn't a good idea, or my parents didn't think I should do it, or my job said I wouldn't, they wouldn't let me back if I did it. And so I think a lot of that anxiety, if you will, stems from a couple key categories, one of which is financial, right? Because when you decide to make a leap, either you have no income or an unstable income, depending upon what you're deciding to do. And then the other side of it is really a personal anxiety of, will people look at me differently? Do they have, are they asking if I'm crazy? All these things. So I think it all boils down to a sense of anxiety. And, fortunately for me, I kind of don't care what people think a little bit. So like, I never felt like I had judgment. And frankly, I was really lucky. My people supported me. My parents supported me. They trusted that, what I had done up until then was good. And if I was going to do this, it was going to be good too. But for other people, I think it's really just trusting yourself. Like if there's something in your gut that says this situation that I'm in doesn't feel good, that's kind of reason number one. And then from the financial standpoint, again, everybody's different, so I'm not going to speak to, all the different scenarios. People still have student loan debt or other forms of debt. They may not have the run rate of cash to, support, a long-term adventure. But I think whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, there is probably a window that people could potentially, take this time off for. And so I think it's really just thinking through, what's the strategy? What's the goal? What's my run rate of money that I would need to do it? And then convincing yourself that you have it. And once you've convinced yourself, I think everything else is easy.
The last question we ask to every guest on the show is we try to think about it in terms of like not too short term, but not too long term. So we think about in a 3 to 5 year window, what are you most excited about?
Is no an appropriate answer? I mean,
yeah.
Not that I'm not, I just, not to sound hokey, I'm just really trying to be in the present and just, kind of get through sort of what I'm doing right now. And I think that at some point in the next 6 months, there will be something that I'll be excited about 3 to 5 years from now. I just haven't experienced that yet. So I do firmly believe that, in the near future, and then looking back, there will be a moment or a person or a experience that will have led me to be like, that was incredible. I don't think I'm there yet.
No, I love it. Well, I'm super excited to follow along with your journey, see where you take it. Definitely enjoy all your travels and your time off. And I really appreciate your time. And I think a lot of people will resonate with your story.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We want to hear from you as we keep growing. Please reach out on whyquit.co if you have any feedback or potential guests. A special thanks to Chris Dole for the music. Please check out his newest album, Here's to You, on Spotify. Thank you, and we will be back next week with another episode.